Welcome to the April 14th City Council work session. The agenda is set up for about 30 minutes of committee reports, and then we'll get on to our MUPTI program revisions. So I'll make a few short comments, and then we'll go around and see if anybody has any reports to make. I got to speak at the end and do a resolution proclamation along with Mayor Lundberg, Springfield, in recognition of caregivers, people who care for elderly and disabled and others who need their care, and had a chance to speak to the Rotary and enjoyed that, downtown Rotary, right? Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed that opportunity. Had our Region RAIN, our Business Accelerator Board meeting. Actually, I thought you might like to know that I had lunch with Margaret, and she sends her greetings to all of you. I went to recognize that the students at St. Paul's Parish planted trees for the city park. I went over to the Bee weekend at Glory Bee. Participated in the U.S. National Day of Silence. Went over to McKenzie Surgery Center for their day of giving free operations to help people with low-income folks. And Chris and I were at the Bolt celebration. Do such wonderful work in our community. And I went and read books with Mayor Lundberg to young people. So that's all the stuff that I've been up to this last week. Chris.
Main thing, just focusing in, the Blaine Council of Governments is currently working, as I think I mentioned before, on revising its bylaws and it's not so much its charter, that's set, but its bylaws, its operating agreements, to kind of bring them up to current times and how things operate now. I don't think they've been really seriously looked at for a while. In addition to that, they're also re-looking at the dues structure. They have come to the conclusion, I'm on the dues committee, that the dues structure for Elkhart for a long time has really not been very uniform, clear, or organized. So they want to put a much greater emphasis on the real services that you get for the money that you pay in. I think the benefit to us in the larger jurisdictions is, in the larger jurisdictions is we've been carrying a lot of the cost of LPOG, which is okay to some degree, but I think there was some inequity in terms of the services you were getting for what you were paying in. So there's going to be a new due structure proposed that I think will be not only much more fair and more clear, but will also be more helpful to the larger jurisdictions. That's the main thing I have.
Okay, Alan?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So does that mean our dues go down, or does it go up?
At this point, the dues would not go up. In fact, we're looking, as you know, we've benefited from a dues reduction for the past couple of years because of the economy. But rather than having the dues go back up again to their previous levels, we're now looking at a rate that would probably keep them at about where they are now as the normal rate. So they wouldn't go up. They may not go down a lot, but they would not go up the way they should have gone up after a recession.
Okay, thanks. I'll report back on MPC. I think the big thing that happened at MPC was is the Connect Oregon 5. It's the 5th time they've done a Connect Oregon, which is transportation funding in the state pool of money. We're in Area 2, and our area is geographically pretty broad. Encompasses, there's only 5 areas. 4 areas? 5 areas. 5 areas of the whole state, so it's 20% of the state. And our area is guaranteed at least $4.2 million for the entire area for projects, which is pittance for these things. And the MPC's role is to provide a list of projects in priority order to the Lane Act, and the Lane Act then forwards that on to the Super Act, which then forwards it on to the OTC for final funding. And what I handed out here is a list of the projects that were discussed at the Lane Act meeting, which I attended for the mayor, and the projects and where they came from. And So likely with that amount of money, probably the top 2 projects are going to get funded, and maybe the third and possibly the fourth, depending on how good they are. So we had 9 projects, 3 of which were forwarded by the MPC. The first 2 of which are ranked number 1 and number 2. They're both from LTD. About the 6th one down, West 11th Biped bridge connections are the bridge connections that are off of the MX system that go across the Amazon, and that's to help make those stronger and build those bridges. That's $2.8 million. And then the second highest ranked one was the Franklin Boulevard Phase 1 transit stations. That one's actually in Glenwood and Springfield. That transit station where McVeigh Road meets right before you go over the bridge into Springfield, that area is going to be transformed, and part of it is a revision of that transit station. And then the third and the fourth one actually essentially tied, and then we decided to move the Cresswell Airport, the top one there, City of Cresswell, airport taxi lane, water sewer line improvements, move that one above the fourth one, which is the third one down, Eugene Bike Share. We've talked about the Eugene Bike Share. That's the 170 bikes, 20-something stations connecting with the 4 stations, and 70 bikes at the U of O. So connecting the downtown corridor with the U of O and the whole downtown area in that. So that was the 4th ranked one. And then the Mackenzie River Trail Restoration, which is a small grant, but might be important for that community, was ranked 5th. The other ones, or you can see what they are, but they're not likely to make it onto the list. So small amount of money, large amounts of projects wanting to be on there. Pretty confident the first 2 mayor are going to get provided money for, maybe the third and the fourth one, but after that's probably not very likely. So 2 of these projects are in Eugene, one's in Springfield, and then the fourth one is in Cresswell, and then the Mackenzie River Trail is, of course, up the Mackenzie River, Mackenzie Bridge. So I think that's the bulk of the MPC that I want to report.
Thank you. Mike?
I had the pleasure a couple of weeks ago to sit with the mayor at the mayor's one-on-one in my ward, in Ward 5, there at the Delta Market of Choice, and we heard from a number of folks and enjoyed that very much. George and I had an opportunity to meet with some neighborhood leaders from North Eugene here just a few days ago and try and help them with a couple of issues in our area that they're concerned about. Let's see, what else? At the end of this last week, I was invited by Mark Frohnmeyer, and I ventured into Claire's ward down to the Whitaker area where they're building electric cars at Arcimoto, and went for a test drive with one of those around our downtown, and I must say that was an awful lot of fun. I enjoyed that very much, and what a great vehicle. I wish them great success. Also say they're about to open a brand new restaurant next door there that I got
Taqueria, right?
the Tacovore is the name of the place right there. Yeah, and I got toured through that by the owner, and I must say that looks like it's going to be a fantastic place. Had the chance to attend the Beltline Redesign Steering Committee meeting by phone the other day, and Claire was there and could probably provide more information. But suffice it to say, we're getting closer to some final options that will be put forward to the NEPA process at this point, and Claire and I both have requested of the ODOT folks and professional staff there that they bring all of that information here to a full council briefing so everybody can see kind of the 3 or 4 options that have been developed that will be going forward for final choice of 1 or 2 before it gets put in front for the NEPA process. So they'll all understand what we're looking at for that redesign and rebuild. Then we also attended this last week the police commission meeting, and I'm happy to report that we've come most of the way through a new policy piece that addresses any kinds of bias, cuts down on issues around racial profiling and other bias-related contacts that the police may have. It gives them good information on what a professional contact and stop looks like and what we expect of our officers, and gives them good guidance for how to do that well. I believe in this next this next month's meeting, we'll probably finish that off and approve it, and that'll be something to celebrate, I think. So,
Great, thanks, Mike. George?
Thank you. I will be attending the my first Public Safety Coordinating Council meeting, May 21st, I believe it is. So they haven't had a meeting since Greg stepped down and I took over for him. And I had asked if Carrie Westland could come and give a real short presentation for Travel Lane County. She's going to be sending out a dashboard. And basically what that is it kind of gives you an idea of the trends and impacts that the tourism industry has on not only Lane County but in Eugene also. So John has said that we will make time for her to actually come and give a presentation to the entire council at a later time. So it'll be interesting to see.
Greg?
Well, I've been under the weather, Mayor, for about the last 4 weeks, and I've been battling some stuff, so I'm in the process of catching up. Hopefully I'll be caught up by the end of the week. That's why I was out and missed Wednesday's meeting. So it's coming back around, but it's taking me a little bit of time to get on the mend.
We hope you get better. It sounds like you still have some cold hanging on there.
Allergies and
That's
sinus infections.
You're not alone, if that makes you better.
that's a big plus.
Rich?
Thanks, Mayor. I don't have a lot to report. I've worked a lot this last week on homelessness, rest stop, and fundraising for Civic Stadium, and that took up a lot of my time, but no committee reports.
Betty?
I'll pass.
Claire?
Well, Mike covered a couple of my items quite well, actually, the Beltline facilities process and the police commission. In my neighborhood in Whitaker, we did have a very productive public safety meeting a couple of weeks ago. A block watch on one particular street had gotten together around concerning some ongoing problems with a particular house, and we had the watch commander from EPD and the code enforcement staff also come to the meeting and talk about the measures they had taken to help address some of the problems, and also just how the system works in general. It was a very productive meeting, and I was impressed with the work of staff around that. So I think the neighbors were very happy as well. There's obviously more to be done, but it was a good beginning. And then on the Human Services Commission, I think the main thing is that we are taking applications and starting the appointment process for the HUD-required Poverty and Homelessness Board that will be made up of elected officials, including Mayor Piercy, and then social service agency representatives, and then also folks who either have experienced homelessness or in some other way have represent consumers in that sense. So I think that will be a very useful board for us to kind of look at and see what we might want to peel off in terms of work of this council around these issues. So this is both short-term and long-term planning in terms of how we allocate resources to address poverty and alleviate homelessness.
Where's that going to reside?
So that will live within the Human Services Commission, and it's a new requirement of HUD for communities like ours that receive certain HUD funding.
And I think it's going to, the new committee starts up in June, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, made the rounds. Thank you, everybody. So now we're going to go on to our work session item, which is multi-unit property tax exemption program revisions that we've been working on for quite a while. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll just turn it over to Denny to lead us off.
Thank you. This evening, Council is asked to consider a recommendation that would reform the multi-unit property tax exemption program. And as you recall, the program was suspended or has been suspended through July 31st, and Council has expressed the desire to modify the program prior to the end of that suspension period. At the last work session on MUPD, we received direction to seek stakeholder input, particularly from the development community, from labor interest, and affordable housing interest as well. We've had several meetings with stakeholder groups. We met with the TRG, which is the Technical Resource Group for Envision Eugene. They looked at the criteria, they looked at the boundary, and how both of these will help us advance our Envision Eugene goals. We met with the Housing Policy Board, who created a committee specifically to look at this issue, and they considered how the MUPTI program could meet affordable housing goals. We met with a development stakeholder group that included developers, a banker, an appraiser, and they considered how the criteria would potentially interact with actual projects. We met with several individuals that represented construction trades, including contractors and union representatives, to discuss local economic impact goals that we have. We met with the Human Rights Commission subcommittee, at their request, to discuss criteria related to hiring and labor issues in the community. And we worked with staff in our green building program and in consultation with the city's internal building and an energy code group. Really, they did some research regarding the newest changes in LEED. There's a LEED version 4, and we looked at how that new version of LEED would interact with proposed MUPTI criteria. Several of the folks I noticed today are out in the audience that participated, so I thank them for not only participating, but for being here with us this evening to take a look at where we are. Details from all of the discussions that we had with each of these stakeholder groups is included in the attachments, and those are attachments B through F in your packet. And based on this stakeholder input, we've revised the program criteria, which, again, we're asking you to consider this evening. So first, I want to just provide a brief overview of how the program would work, given the recommendation. And first of all, a project application is submitted, and it must meet minimum threshold criteria to be considered for the tax exemption. And I'll talk about each of these steps in more detail in just a second. We're proposing that there be a MUPTI review panel, which would be established to review each project application. In some special cases, when the project meets the minimum threshold criteria, but the panel concludes that an exemption of less than 10 years is needed for the project to move forward, the project would be able to earn additional years under additional public benefit criteria by adding project elements that would be reviewed by the panel. The city manager would make a recommendation to council based on the panel's review, and city council will still approve each project applications as it's done in the past. And the review panel would conduct an annual review and assist in the preparation of an annual report on the MUPTI program. All of these really tie back to meeting our Envision Eugene goals related to the pursuit of compact urban development, specifically meeting our multi-unit housing growth needs, which we've previously identified as a gap of approximately 1,600 multifamily housing units that are not expected to occur on their own without some form of intervention. And again, MUPTI is one of the major intervention tools that we're focused on using to advance these goals. And if you recall, the TRG concluded that some targeted redevelopment areas may need even more than MUPTI in order for that redevelopment to occur. So I anticipate that we'll be back in the near future to talk about some of those other tools that we might use to advance these goals. The full technical research group, the TRG technical summary, is included in attachment G in your packet. In attachment A, there was a memo summarizing the additions and/or the changes that have been made since our last work session, along with the complete recommended MUPTI criteria. And I want to quickly hit some highlights, particularly the updates and changes that have occurred. Starting with the minimum threshold criteria that all projects, again, would need to meet in order to be eligible. Project type, there's no change from the last discussion we had, but I think it's important to restate that student housing, as we defined in the criteria, would not be eligible for the tax exemption. Boundary, there were some additions from our last discussion. Council requested or made a recommendation that we add West 11th, and that's reflected in the recommendation. There's also some property within the eWeb ownership, north of 4th, west of the Ferry Street Bridge Viaduct. That's not included in the downtown plan, so we think it's important to add that property. And there's also a property on 11th and Lincoln. It's a property owned by Marty Henner. If you recall, we actually approved a MUPTE, but when we reconfigured the boundary to only include the downtown plan, his property was basically across the street or just outside the downtown plan. So we're recommending that he be put back into the program because he is expected to still move forward with the co-housing project. As far as density, we've added specificity regarding projects being required to exceed the minimum density in the code. For example, in residential zones, projects must be at least 175% of minimum density that's in the code. And in a commercial zone, a residential-only project must be at least 50 units per acre. And just for a note, the items that are underlined in italics are kind of new edited items that you might want to consider. Project design, we've added a provision that the design presented during the review and approval project must be adhered to. For example, value engineering or removing desirable design elements that occurred when the project approved or that were part of that approval could result in disqualification of the project. The idea there is just to lock in what was proposed. Regarding green building, again, based on an analysis of the new LEED version 4, the minimum threshold criteria recommendation is that a project be LEED certified under version 4 or LEED silver under the old 2009 version of LEED. And we basically, based on analysis, concluded that under version 4, LEED silver would basically be the equivalent, or LEED certified would basically be the equivalent of LEED gold under the old system. So just having a project LEED certified is considered to be a pretty high threshold. The exceptions to that being Train Song and West 11th boundary areas, where it was concluded that marking conditions wouldn't likely support the LEED construction cost and certification cost. In those areas, projects would be required to demonstrate that they are providing other public benefits included in the additional public benefit criteria, which we'll talk about in a second. Also, in all boundary areas, applicants could demonstrate that LEED is not economically feasible, and they could request consideration of other public benefit criteria. For example, they could propose to reach an energy performance standard at 10% above Oregon Energy Code as an alternative. There's been no change to the neighborhood contact provision. The affordable housing criteria has been refined, and this requirement is to include the payment of an affordable housing fee, and at this point, we're recommending a range of 5 to 10% of the exemption, and we'd be interested in some feedback in that regards. Based on input from the Housing Policy Board and developer stakeholders, we eliminated the requirement that affordable housing units be incorporated into the projects, and the feedback that we got really concluded that for-profit developers don't have the experience marketing and documenting income on affordable housing projects. And basically, it's a highly complex, highly specialized field, and to the point that we wouldn't really expect units to occur in these projects if we were to require those. Additionally, a fee dedicated to affordable housing could be invested in support of long-term affordable units, not just 10 years. There's a recognition that low-income tenants could, at the end of the 10-year exemption period, get displaced in favor of higher rents that the projects would want to achieve. We also concluded that a collection of the fee would create a flexible source of targeted affordable housing funds that could be used to leverage other federal funds or address other critical community needs associated with housing and homelessness. We met with several stakeholders from construction trades. Based on their input and a comprehensive legal analysis by the city attorney, we've drafted some criteria that requires project applicants to submit a local economic impact plan indicating how they plan to meet a local economic impact goal. And the goal being that 50% of the dollar volume of contracted services and construction contracts include local firms, defined as Lane County. We also added language that requires projects to follow all labor and tax laws, for example, ensuring that workers have the required licenses. And we added language that elevates construction workers' awareness that we have a rights assistance program within our equity and human rights program. Project need, there's basically no change. We still required the project to demonstrate that it would not move forward but for the exemption, and the projected overall rate of return as reviewed by the panel does not exceed 10%. Overall, we've really got fairly strong consensus among most of or all of the stakeholder groups that if projects meet these minimum threshold criteria, there would be significant public benefit outcomes provided in future MUPTE projects. The MUPTE review panel is proposed to be appointed by the city manager. It could be a variety of expertise, including developers, architects, labor, green building expertise, affordable housing interests, representatives from the TRG, equity, human rights, and others. The role of the MUPTE review panel is proposed to be the review of projects' conformance with the minimum threshold criteria and to review in truth the financial projections to determine to what extent the tax exemption is needed. For example, they may recommend that based on their analysis that a project only needs a 7-year exemption to move forward, given the 10% rate of return threshold. In that case, they could review the additional public benefit criteria, again, as a way for those projects to earn additional years of tax exemption. The panel would make a recommendation to the city manager and, again, assist in the preparation of the annual report. The additional public benefit criteria concept is to have a flexible menu of options for projects that may not qualify for the full 10-year tax exemption. And under this concept, a project could earn additional years to a maximum of 10-year tax exemption if they add project elements that generate additional benefit to the community. If you recall, the TRG took a historical look at redevelopment in the community, particularly around multifamily housing, and they basically concluded that other than student housing, there's been really virtually no multifamily redevelopment that's occurred. So we really would expect that the number of projects that demonstrate a return of greater than 10% to be very limited. So we're recommending that those be treated as special cases, and rather than have a point system, for example, or a weighted system, that we really look at those projects individually, look at the neighborhoods that they're in, their locations, how those individual projects really kind of generate the most public benefit for that particular case. And that's kind of similar to what we did with the Core Campus project. As you recall, we negotiated a different path given our financial analysis of that project. Again, the annual report would be conducted along with the assistance of the review panel, and their report would include review of the projects, all of the project's financial performance, review of conformance with the criteria that's in the program. They would analyze the overall program volume and the effectiveness of the program and make recommendations to the city manager regarding program changes. This is a map of the proposed boundary. And as you can see, it lines pretty well with some of our Envision Eugene goals around compact urban core area development and development along the corridors. Especially when you overlay the MX routes. This is the existing MX route and the proposed West 11th leg of MX. You overlay, and you can't see that very well, but you overlay some of the future plans for future MX routes. You really can clearly see how MUPTE is strategically intended to achieve some of our transit goals, our development-oriented transit goals in particular. And if you overlay current transit stops and kind of look at a quarter mile from all the MX transit stops, you really start to see how the MUPTI program overlays with many of the goals that we have for getting people out of their cars, getting to transit stops efficiently, living, working, shopping within a nodal system. So the recommendation today is to direct the city manager to schedule a public hearing on an ordinance modifying the MUPTI program criteria consistent with the criteria that's included in Attachment A in your packet.
Thank you, Denny. I've got Mike in the queue. Others? Alan. Okay. So I wanted to ask a couple questions and express a couple concerns. One concern I have is I understand about the flexibility around LEED, but I don't want us to move far away from our aspirations. So whatever we need in language to keep us focused on wanting to do those energy savings and meet those standards seems important. And I don't know where that line is, but I just want to express concern about that. In terms of the affordable housing part of that, as I recall the conversation we had the last time we really talked about this, it was that fee or that fund could go into not only what we call sort of classic affordable housing, but it could be perhaps utilized for other housing poverty needs in the community. I just want to be sure the language gives us enough flexibility to say that. And then third issue that I have is I want to understand that if we have give someone a MUPTI and they get a whole lot of safety violations and things of that sort as they work, do we have a way to have that affect the MUPTI? I know BOLI takes care of it and all of that, but I'm just asking what do we get to say about it that they're not being good players as far as we're concerned?
Yeah, as you can see, we've added language. They basically said that the developers have to basically work with contractors who are abiding by all laws and regulations, including licensing and wage laws and so forth. And that really, the feedback we got is that really levels the playing field, so to speak, so that our local contractors have a much better opportunity of achieving some of the work, some of the bids, because it's more of a level playing field because everyone's playing by the same rules at that point. So in effect, if they don't do that, we have the ability to disqualify the tax exemption, and that's how the criteria is written.
I just wanted to be sure of that because I think in some conversations sometimes we say that they get dinged, BOLI or someone else is the one who delivers the response to that, and I just want to be sure that we have some way ourselves of saying we think you've breached your contract with us, and we can do something about it. The final thing that I just wanted to say at this moment is when it comes to the review panel, especially as we're starting it up for the first time, and I think the manager would do this anyway, but I just really would like there to be an opportunity for council input into that so that they can hear, you can hear from them what matters to them, and they have some confidence in who's on that and so forth. So I just want to be sure.
Yeah, we've done that with some others, and we would do it with this one, too.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Denny, very much to you for the presentation, and to the other staff folks who worked on this. I know it's been a lot of hard work, and I appreciate it very much. I think that you've done a great deal to capture the council conversation to this point, and I think we're about 95% of the way there, but I don't believe we're fully there yet. I have only some concern, and it's this. The purpose for us to suspend this and to go back to square one and kind of refigure the ordinance and refigure the rules for this, from my perspective, was oriented around two things generally. One, making sure that from a community standards point of view, we could articulate a great deal more community benefit for the foregoing of those for that tax credit, for giving someone the opportunity to save that money, we want to see a great deal more community benefit, and we want to be able to articulate these list of things, and that's a good thing. The other piece is that this particular opportunity, this incentive, that's very necessary for us to accomplish our Envision Eugene goals, that's absolutely necessary for us to see the kind of development that we want to see in certain parts of town that we've been targeting, meets with a lot of community resistance. And in some quarters it meets with a great deal of resistance, and some people think it's just plain unfair. So I noticed at the beginning there the big presentation you made on all of the community stakeholder groups that you brought in and had work with you on this, and I think that's great. That's kind of as all of us asked for. There was one, however, that was missing for me that I think we need to just slow down a little and bring into the picture just to make sure, because I was concerned at the very beginning that we make sure that if we're going to redo this, that we bring as many people on board as possible to look at it and say, yeah, it may not be perfect, but I can live with that tool. I think that's useful, and I'm not going to oppose it. I noticed that there's no neighborhood associations or neighborhood leader groups that weighed in on this as a panel, and I'd like to do that. So I guess how I would best handle that is to say, before we get to moving this to an ordinance and to a public hearing, I would move that we reschedule one additional work session for MUPTE after the staff has had a chance to present it in its current form to a panel of neighborhood leaders for their input.
I'll second.
Seconded.
I must say, to speak to that just for a second, if I can, that I know I've received emails and calls and input from a number of folks, both in other parts of the city, but certainly in North Eugene, that want to have a little opportunity to weigh in and talk about this. So I'd appreciate everyone's support if we just wait that one last piece before we put this forward.
George Brown, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I think that Councilor Clark is exactly right on this. I think you've nailed it on the head, Mike. It's just absolutely essential that we hear from the neighbors, especially because of this proposed boundary expansion is going to go in neighborhoods where they don't have it, and I think that they need to weigh in on it. I think we also need to hear from people who are already in the apartment business, from smaller stakeholders who are going to be affected by this basically what essentially is a gigantic expansion of the program. And we haven't heard from them. We haven't heard from property managers or people that already are renting developments to residents, and we haven't heard from them. And we definitely need to hear from the neighbors and this other group. The idea is to craft a product that has widespread community buy-in. And the way I look at this, we're not, I disagree with you on this one point, Mike, we're not 95% there. We're got a long ways to go. In my view, there's many deficiencies in what's been presented to us so far, and I want to go through what I see the deficiencies later, but it's just way too early to have a public hearing. There's too many things left out. I mean, we're seeing an outline of an ordinance. It's not fully fleshed out. It needs to be fleshed out, and council needs to discuss it. And maybe we need to go over each element by element for council approval, kind of like what we did with the the emergency protections for the university area. Because, we're not really we're not having a focused discussion on any one element of this at council level. I feel that we need to do that. We're going to really be letting the community down if we don't come up with a good product that they can support. And I've invested fully of good faith effort to help craft a good product. I want to see a good product. I do not want it to fail. I do not want to have to turn against this thing personally. I mean, it is a sincere effort on my part to come up with a good product, and I think we've gotten way far away what I think is a good product. In the next round, I'll detail some of my observations. Thanks.
Rich Polling.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Mike, and I think we are closer to 95% than a long way off. I read all the comments and all the materials from the different groups that were involved, and I think there were some pretty good points raised, and I think, Denny, you and your staff and everybody that worked on this did a good job responding to the comments that were received. In reference to the MUPTI review panel, I think also someone from either the NLC, the Neighborhood Leadership Council, or the neighborhood associations be a member of that, because they are the ones that are going to be mostly impacted by whatever is built. And I think their input is very important, only not on the review panel, but also prior to this going to a public hearing, to see how far off, what's being proposed to what is what their opinions are also. I think the neighborhood groups are very important on this one.
Bruce, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm just curious about the timeline. And I think that Mike's proposal is a reasonable one. Having as much input as possible is always a good thing. I want to know what that might do to the timeline that we were originally projecting, and there's a sunset date on the moratorium right now, and I want to know whether adding this element, is that going to impact that sunset date, or could it be integrated into the process in such a way that we could still meet that date?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and I don't remember the exact number of neighborhoods, but there's, I think, at least a dozen different neighborhoods that are impacted by the boundary, that overlap the boundary in some way. So finding an efficient way to do that is going to be a little bit of a challenge, and it may be a focus group of leaders or something that we could do more quickly.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to lead to, is rather than try to meet with all of them separately, which is logistically very challenging, is you could perhaps meet with the neighborhood leaders, or you could meet with some combined group so that you could do it fairly efficiently. I'd like to do that. I think that is a good idea, to make sure that all the stakeholder groups that might have an impact are checked in with. But I don't want to create something that's so logistically difficult that it throws us way off. So what I'm asking is there a way to craft a way to accomplish this and still at least maintain the bulk of our timeline that we're still trying to meet? And I think if you can do that, then I'm more than happy to support Mike's proposal.
Okay, I've got, speaking to this motion, George Brown, Betty, and Mike.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. This is related to the motion in kind of a backside type of way. I'm wondering from the city attorney if you could, and you may not know the exact date right now, but I'm wondering if you could tell us the last date to schedule a public hearing for an ordinance to extend the MUPTI suspension, because it's due to expire on July 31st. And if we don't, my feeling is if we don't have a good product ready and have held that public hearing, that we might slide past that date and it would go back into effect. And I don't think it was the will or intent of the council to have the old version go into effect without a really honest shot at crafting a good new product. So you understand my question, I think.
I do. The council would need to take action on an ordinance extending the date by the end of June, so that there's 30 days for the ordinance to take effect. In order for the council to take action by the end of June, you could have a public hearing. I mean, in theory, you could have a public hearing the end of June and take action that night, although typically you would have the public hearing the week before. So it would be probably the third Monday in June for a public hearing, and then action on the fourth Monday in June.
Thank you. That's all.
Betty?
Okay, I approve of consulting the neighborhoods, only I think there should be a meeting in each neighborhood, a well-publicized meeting. And when you talk about stakeholders, the stakeholders are the taxpayers, people who pay their taxes, should have something to say about tax exemptions for other people. I think there's nothing that nothing I know of that makes more people angry than the tax exemptions we've given. They all the time I hear about that. So I think if we're doing this, I see a lot of things, this is not on the motion, but I'll save the other things for later, but I will support the motion for now.
Mike?
George addressed my questions. I pass. Thanks.
Okay, so I think we're ready to vote on Mike's motion. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favor and none in opposition. That motion passes. We're back now to the main queue, and I have George Brown, Claire, and Alan in the main queue.
Thank you, Matt. Well, here's why I disagree with a couple of my colleagues about, the sufficient, I think that what we have in front of us is just loaded with insufficiencies, and things aren't nailed down enough, and I made a list that I'd like to run down. There's no annual dollar cap for the total exemptions awarded. That means that lots of people could apply. It could be millions of dollars a year, theoretically. Portland has an annual cap of $1 million that all the developers share in that cap, and so far they haven't exceeded it. The number of people applying has fit under that cap pretty well. It gets refreshed every year. There's no competitive process. Anybody can get an exemption, basically, but they don't have to compete against anybody else like they do in Portland. The affordability minimum threshold requirement is so watered down, as far as I'm concerned, it's almost meaningless. And I'd like another round just to talk about that element alone. I did some analysis and some figuring of the two past projects and how that aligns with what's being proposed that we accept. I think the public benefits are very poorly defined. If the city is going to forego revenue, I really believe a more specific menu of public benefit options should be included in the minimum threshold requirements and the scoring of the proposals in a competitive process. And there's another, I think, serious deficiency is there's no scorecard information. We have no idea how we're going to be rating applications. How many points for this? How many points for that? How many points for this? We definitely need to see that before we schedule a public hearing. I've got 56 seconds left. One suggestion that one of the stakeholder groups came up with, which I think is good, but that could be done separately, is to include for sale units in the tax exemption in some form of program. And they do that in Portland, but separate from their multiple unit limited tax exemption. They call it HULTE. And they do that for home buyers. And affordability is a key component of that program, and I think that's a great idea. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a house. It could be an apartment unit or like a condominium. I think that's good. I think we can pursue that separately. That doesn't have to be included in this, but I think that's a really good idea. I think the boundaries are way too broad. I think they're way too broad. You can, they include areas that don't really need MUPTI, in my view. South Willamette, Midtown, these are not, I went over. I'll need another round there.
Sure. Okay, Claire.
Thank you. So I also appreciate the work that's gone into this, and I know that a lot of good thinking has gone into it, but I do have some concerns, some along the lines of Councilor Brown's. So wondering, let me figure out how I want to tackle this. So it seems like we're exempting large portions of the whole MUPTI area from a LEED certification requirement and or putting into the Affordable Housing Fund. So I see exemptions for 6-7 Train-Song Highway 99 corridor for paying the affordable housing fee, and a waiving of the requirement to meet LEED certification or equivalent for that same area. And my understanding is that, in other communities where they've done transit corridor development, those parts of the transit corridor, actually property values go up, and there's more incentive for developers to work in those areas. So I question the rationale for some of those waivers. And I am concerned that we are going to be allowing less than the high standard of housing that we would want in other parts of the city for Train Song in particular, Highway 99 in particular. So I understand the challenges of redevelopment, but it concerns me to think that we're going to require a LEED certification for a place built on Willamette Street, but not for Train Song, and that energy efficiency is just as important in lower income, more affordable housing as it is in the higher standard, higher income housing developments we might have. So that's a big red flag for me, and I would want some real rationale for why that needs to be in there for this. You know, if the LEED certification piece is a challenge, then there should be an ability to waive it for any project and some reasoning behind it, not just for certain parts. And I think we need to strengthen the clawback provision, or have an explicit clawback provision for noncompliance. The terminology in here is pretty vague. The city manager has authority to deny or not to deny. I think we need something stronger. And I agree with Councilor Brown that I'd like to see some more public benefit be part of the minimum threshold criteria. But if we don't all agree on that, I think the public benefit project features does need to be more specific, and we need some kind of idea of how those would be weighted in terms of how much of an extension of your tax break are those going to offer. And I can wait for my other things the next time this comes up for discussion.
Yeah, when brought this up before to revise this program, I thought it needed to be revised so that there were clear public benefits, that we actually saw what we were getting for this. It was sometimes not clear what we were getting for our deferral of tax revenue, and there needed to be more transparency, and we needed to limit the ROI that people were getting, and we couldn't tell all of that, and you couldn't tell if there was public benefit, you couldn't, and if it were in particular needed. I didn't think we needed to have it for student housing, and in most cases it's not needed. I still think the hub project doesn't need it to be built, but that's water under the bridge. But all in all, I like the way this is going. It's much, much better and much, much clearer than where we were before, and it's heading in the right direction for me. It has much clearer public benefits: the green buildings, the energy codes, affordable housing fund, the local economic development, local hire 50% of the contract values, our contract volumes, the minority and women and emerging business provision, the fact that contractors need to be licensed, they have to abide by all the laws about insurance, bonding, and workers' comp. That wasn't part of it before. That we're limiting the ROI to 10%, I think is a good thing. That you can add in these additional public benefits, that there is now a financial reporting requirement. All of those things are great, and this is an outline. It's tended to be an outline. It's not the ordinance, so yeah, there's a lot of specifics to be built up out of this. So I have my concerns about the specifics and the things that I think need more detail. I think the boundaries may be too broad. I'm not sure about all the areas, specifically Midtown and South Willamette, need this. I think there's the affordable housing portion, and it has a range of 5 to 10%. I think we should just have it be a number, and I was suggesting early on that it be 10%. I'd like to see that. I think we need an annual volume cap. Not clear about what the review panel role is. Not sure the minority, women in business, disadvantaged business part, how that actually works. It just says encourages. Well, okay, we encouraged it, but nothing happened. So what? So that needs to be worked on. LEED 2009 is going away by June of next year. I don't even know why we're having that be in here. It just should be version 4. And in fact, what we're talking about is LEED Silver in 2009 is basically the code right now in terms of energy, and version 4 is about 5% better. And I think Claire, you were correct that exempting some of the parts of the city from this requirement is heading in the wrong direction. It might be counterproductive because the operating cost of a house is really what's important to the renters, and that's energy and utilities. And then two more things real quick: how to add public benefits, and then how the remedies portion of this works. What's the process for it? How do you enforce it?
Debbie?
Okay. I expect there won't be any enforcement, but I think, I don't remember anyone being turned down for a MUPTI who applied for it. I think that they are all going to say this could not be built without a tax exemption, and they're going to get it if they want it. I think and I don't think anybody should be exempted from paying taxes, actually. There are people, and I've said this before, people who can barely afford to pay their taxes on their homes, and it doesn't feel good to them to see other people get a big tax exemption for 10 years. If we do this, I think that the affordable housing should be incorporated within each unit, within each building, or if it's houses, well, it would be houses if it's multi-unit. It's done in some places. It's done in the city of Boston. It's done in some states, some countries where it's called inclusionary zoning, and our legislature has said we can't have inclusionary zoning, but we can say that part of the units need to be affordable for people making a certain income, whatever income we think that people who are working at the jobs that are available in Eugene should be able to afford the housing. And people who are making just barely a living wage, for example. And it is possible to do that. It's possible to make some of the units less luxurious, less large. All sorts of things can be done, and it erases the stigma of living in subsidized housing if you're incorporated. I believe in integration in lots of ways, but integration of income levels as well as other kinds. And I think if we continue the program, which I hope we don't, but if we do, I think we should insist on incorporating really affordable housing. I don't mean subsidized, affordable. I mean affordable. Thank you.
Okay, I know we're going to do another round here, but the thing that strikes me about this, I don't know, you're making a list of what people bring up, and if you need any clarification on any of those, you probably ought to ask that, because I think this is going to end up being like we have in the past, where we take it an item at a time, and otherwise we'll just all express our opinion and circle around it. So I think you're going to have to make a list, and we're just going to have to go through it and see which things the majority of council agrees with and which they don't, and kind of walk our way through it. So that's the way it looks to me. So the next time we visit this, I think that's how we'll have to approach it. So I want to be sure you have, at least for today, as comprehensive a list as you can get, and if there's other questions you want to ask, if you get a chance to ask them. John, Denny, okay? I'm not hearing anything, so, yeah. All right. George.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I finished off with, I've got problems with the massive expansion of the boundaries to areas that that are not economically stressed areas, and where developments have been being built. Just since I've been on council, there have been actually several developments on South Willamette, and Cascade Manor Retirement Centers is going to do a huge expansion, and there's other projects planned. So I'm just not convinced that area needs MUPTI, nor does Midtown. That's a very desirable part of town, very active, very it's upscale economically. Anyway, I'd like to go back to one of my main objections. The Portland Housing Bureau, the purpose of their program, I'm going to quote this: stimulate the construction of affordable housing and other public benefits where such housing or benefits may not otherwise be made available. That's number one. That's a direct quote. Number two, provide transparent and accountable stewards of public investments. End of quote. And if I feel we've strayed way far away. Now, we don't have to copy Portland in every single instance, but if we get too far away from this, which is where I see this thing headed, we're not going to have public support for it, is my guess. So I just like to kind of, I'm going to go back to, I'd like to state that, when I first got on the council 5 years ago, the percentage of Eugenians who were rent burdened was 40%. That's people paying more than 30% of their income for their housing. 5 years later, it's 56%. It's gone up 40%. We're moving backwards. We're falling behind. And the MUPTI program, I can't see that it addressed that at all. I mean, our old one. So I think for community support, we're going to have to address that somehow with this new ordinance. I feel that what's proposed, 5% up front of the exemption, or 10% up front from years 3 through 7, is totally insufficient to address this goal in a meaningful way. Here's what it would have meant for had Core Campus. We approved that last spring. Had we used these criteria, 5% up front, that would have been $22,000.
No, 5% of the total.
10% up front is 5%. $200,000. But here's what they offered. Here's what I'm saying. Here's the big difference. Here's what they offered. They offered $955,000. That's what they're going to pay.
Another round, George?
Yes.
So I want to ask a question. I think I asked you the last time we had this discussion, and I hope you have that with you, Denny, is I want to ask, so what is the goal of our MUPTI program?
By state statute, it is to encourage dense transit-oriented development in the core and along major transit corridors. And I would actually say that that's actually very consistent with our Envision Eugene goals as well. That's really how the community has expressed their desire to see the community grow. So MUPTI is a tool to implement Envision Eugene at this point, and that's how we're proposing that it be used.
So I think it's important that we have that goal at the head of every page we talk about this, so that we are clear about what our intentions and our goal is, and we all see it, and the public can see it, and everybody can see it. The other, just one quick point I want to make is that, because I hear it so often, and I explain it to people, and they go, people are under the, and I know we're not doing student housing anymore, but it has to do with the, why we don't have other kind of multi-unit housing. And the reason that we haven't seen that growth, at least my understanding of it is that during the recession, financial institutions would not fund apartments, condos, or single-unit dwellings. So if you wanted to build something, the only thing that you could get financial backing for was student housing, which is why there was such a high incentive for people to build student housing during that time. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the tightening of the lending institutions, the whole credit market has changed. The fact that our wages still lag behind other areas like Portland, and our construction costs are generally pretty high. All of those together have created some pretty major barriers for new construction, obviously, and we really haven't seen it, especially in redevelopment. I just wanted to mention also, I think this would maybe help frame some of the discussion as well. We've looked at the tax exemption value for projects, and it really ends up being approximately 10% of the hard cost. About 10% of the hard cost for that project. So that's really the value of the tax exemption. And when we start to layer lead costs, which could be a premium in some cases, we heard that the cost of providing lead might end up being about a 5% premium. affordable housing fees, all of those things really together remove some of the benefit. And if the benefit's only about 10% of the construction cost, as we start layering more requirements on these, it does erode a lot of the benefit, and that's what we heard from the stakeholders, is to proceed with caution, because, you know, the market, there's only this small window of opportunity. If we start to erode a lot of that, it's going to keep some projects from moving forward. So
MUPTI is a fairly modest tool, but it's the one that we have. And in terms of the goal we have, and in terms of Envision Eugene, it's not only whether something can be afforded, it's whether people can afford to build it where we want to have it built. So it's really about what this council and this city's intentionality is. And part of that has to do with what you want to have happen along transit corridors as opposed to other places. So you're trying to put things in place that will not only help build what you want to build, but build it in a place that you think the neighbors would prefer, that would do the most good for the community, that have to do with 20-minute neighborhoods, that go after all these other goals that we have. So all of these things fit together. This is not intended as a giveaway. This is intended as a way to focus the limited resources we have to achieve the goals of this community in the best way that we can figure out how to do it. So I just want to make that clear. I've got in the queue Claire Allen and Greg Evans.
Thank you. Well, given the prior comments of the mayor before this round about getting information out to you, I figured I'd finish my other thought, which in terms of the public benefits, which again, I think we should think about putting some of that project features into the main criteria for meeting the MUPTI. I don't think the items on this list are incredibly expensive in terms of what they would cost the project, but could make a huge difference for the surrounding neighborhood. So some of the things listed already in the additional features are encourage alternative transportation options, bus passes, car share, bike share, bus shelters. I think one glaring omission there is enhancing public safety in the area of the project, so whether that's improved lighting, improved pedestrian access, other features that I might be even thinking of that just in the surrounding context of the project would enhance neighborhood livability in a very tangible way. So I'd like to see some more specifics around that. And then what I was referring to earlier, if these are additional project criteria in order to extend the length of the tax break, then how do we weigh these? How do these get weighted into that decision? And I think some thinking needs to go into that and not just be left up to this future committee. And then in terms of the idea of a clawback or some kind of penalty for not following through on the requirements of the program, you know, I think one thing that we have here in this program is a great deal of leverage over, you know, potential bad actors who may not be that afraid of a BOLI action, but would be very concerned if the city told them that we were taking the tax break away from them. So I think that's an important thing for us to remember. And then, you know, it could be that we do dial this in too tight and that no one takes advantage of it, and then we'd have to revisit what we've set up in terms of criteria. And if we need this tool to get to our Envision Eugene goals, then perhaps we can rethink some things. But I think right now, I think Councilor Brown's claim that we need to make this a public benefit in order for it to have public support, I think is very important, and that we need to be thinking about that right here in the immediate. And if we move the pendulum too far to where developers say, hey, I'm not going to be doing any development there, the tax break doesn't pan out for me, then we could revisit the question.
Alan?
Yeah, I think we've actually moved quite a long ways. This is not anything like old MUPTI by any stretch of imagination. I mean, if you just look at the things that we've added a green building requirement, we've added an energy requirement, We've added an affordable housing fund. We've added local impact and local hires, 50% of the contract volume. Minority and women and disadvantaged businesses. They have to follow the laws, the licensed contractors, and insurance bonding, workers' comp. That's another one. ROI can't be greater than 10%, or we decrease the years. That's new. Additional public benefits, how they get in there, I don't know yet, but that's a new thing. The financial reporting requirement is all new. So there's 9 new things that we've added to this. So this is very, very different than the original MUPTE. And I have a process suggestion for moving forward, and that is that you're listening here and you're taking down all this information and all these ideas. I think next time we come together on this, that we go through the minimum threshold criteria one by one, and underneath each one we have some options or decision points that we need to make, and we review them or the more specifics about each one, and then we make a decision about one, and we just go through it one by one, majority vote, and go through it, and it's in, it's not. And then we just move on, go to the next one. And that's how we get this done, I think. And then we look at the whole thing at the end and say, okay, what kind of tweaks or adjustments we want. But then, and whether or not you can support the whole thing. But I think we'll just get bogged down. I think we just need to walk through each one of these on a separate basis, the boundary issues, all those things, and with a bit more specifics. I don't think you intended to come here with this being a specific. This is a very good outline, a great place to start. It just needs to have the meat put on the bones, and then we can move forward and actually come up with something that I think will be substantially different, that will garner support once all is said and done.
Great.
A couple things, and kind of dovetailing on a couple of comments that Alan had earlier in the round. The issue around DBE, MBE, and WBE businesses being considered and involved in this process needs to have some more clarity to it. One of the things that we need to do is we need to have policy developed as a city in terms of goals and aspirations, including WBE, MBE, and DBE contractors, because what we've had over the years, and this is just not with the city of Eugene, but across the country, is the fact of the matter is that the development community is a closed club, and it has been for very many years an old boys club. And I have talked to a number of minority business owners, consultants, contractors who have found doing business in Eugene to be incredibly tough. And so as we're talking about doing development, and particularly doing development around affordable housing and development specifically along transit corridors that are increasingly, as you look at the map, except for South Willamette, are increasingly having gaps between the haves and have-nots. Our poverty rate is continuing to rise. And what we need to do is be very inclusive, not only about where we build affordable housing and how we build affordable housing and how we follow Envision Eugene in terms of compact growth, but how we raise the level of livability in Eugene for all Eugenians and not create further gaps by not focusing our efforts and concentrating our efforts in the areas specific to this, as well as with business owners, women, minority, and disadvantaged business owners who have not had the opportunity to get in there. So I think we need to have more specificity around what our goals and aspirations are within the MUPTE program. And one of the things that and I've talked to John about this, that I'm going to float a work session poll on, is the fact that the city needs to have a much more comprehensive policy, or actually has to have policy to begin with, around goals and aspirations for WBE, MBE, and DBE contracting. And this is one of the ways that we can do it. It's one of the pieces, it's one of the leverage and tools that we have, and that we need to build that kind of rigor in this particular policy that will allow us to move forward in those areas.
Thank you. Next round, George?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to go back to the percentages of the kickback to the city for affordable housing and homelessness. Yes, my first figure was wrong. The 5% up front for core campus sub would have been $220,000. As it was, they themselves volunteered to pay $955,000, which to me I think it makes one question the accuracy and validity of some of the pro formas that have been submitted and some of the project needs presentations. That's 23% of their total exemption they kick back to the city. And, we keep being told that, one of the reasons to expand these boundaries along all the transportation corridors, no matter the economic condition of the neighborhood, is that, if we don't do this, we'll never meet or needed additional 1,600 units for Envision Eugene and things like that. And we keep hearing that housing goals won't be met without MUPTE or other interventions. When I just leave urban renewal aside, I'd like to kind of stick with MUPTE. I keep seeing this claim in conversations, but I haven't seen any credible data. So I know that Technical Resource Group is, I'm hearing this from them, but I don't see actual data to support it. So that would be a data request. And I read in here about the redevelopment estimating tool, which I'd never heard of before. And so did you send council information regarding that?
There is a summary in the packet, which was the TRG summary. They've done a lot more in-depth work than just the summary, so we can report back on that.
Okay, yeah, what I would like to see is, I would like to see the tool itself, the papers describing what it is and the parameters, and then also, has it been used in analyzing how it's been used to date, of like any projects that were examined using that tool. I'd like to learn more about that. I think all the counselors might want to see that. And I'm kind of think that I'd like to see, is it 34,000? Is that the new residents that we're expected in the next 20 years? 34,000 from the Portland State?
That's the population.
Yes, the population growth. Well, I'm just wondering where we are with what's been happening since the last census, and I think it would be good if council could see for the years 2011, that's the first year in the 20-year period since Portland State made that, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014 up to now, how many units have been built, and that would include projects that have been approved that are still being built, and also a definition of units. I'd like to see some level playing ground with the definitions of how many beds in a unit. Because if we're talking 34,000 people, that's 34,000 beds. Less, of course, a few married couples who still sleep together. But you just see what I'm saying? When I see unit, I don't know what that means. I don't know. Is that 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms? Yes.
You got it.
Oh, I'm the last one. Okay. Well,
What's that ordinance language?
you understand what I'm asking here for? Because if I knew, we know we need 34,000, we need to accommodate 34,000 people somehow. Some of it's going to be single-family homes, some of it's going to be multiple family units, and that's what I'm interested in now, because that's what MUPTE applies to. So, how many were built since then? Where are we? It's kind of a check-in on where are we the last 3.5 years.
I'm going to suggest that somebody from Carolyn's staff actually sit down with you and go through that information rather than bringing it back to the whole council.
Well, okay, but if you could send a memo to the council, then everyone, we'd all be on the same page.
It will just be easier for us to actually sit down with you, and then they can answer your specific questions at that time. Putting together the memo will take a significant staff work, and I think it'll be much more efficient for them just to sit down with you.
Sure, then I can share it with council. Sure, that'll work. Okay, thank you.
Okay. don't have anyone else in the queue then, so end the work session. We'll be back for our regular council meeting.